Since we're on the topic of hell, since you've all been marinating in that idea for a few hours now, I thought it would be a good time to have everybody ponder another concept, which is related, intrinsically related to the concept of hell. And that concept is eternity, or infinity. I want you to take a moment, or half an hour, or an hour. Take a limited period of time and ponder infinity. Think about, what does it mean? What does it mean to you? And I want you to ask yourself if you've ever really thought about it outside of the constructs that you were given. And if you haven't, well, then now's a great time to do it. No time like the present, right? Because you've been told that you had a beginning. You've been told that you have a beginning. You've been told that your beginning was your birthday. And as well, you've been told that you have an ending point as well. You have a finish line. You don't know when it's going to be, but it's coming. It's certainly coming. But at the same time, you've also been told that your finish line isn't a real finish line. And that's essentially a demarcation for judgment. So you begin when you're born. You live a hopefully not too shitty 70 or 80 years here on Earth. And then you die. They still say you die, even though it's really the body is dying, but okay. You die, and then you get judged. And then from that point, so there's one tiny life on Earth that lasts for 70 or 80 years. And then after that one life, you have two options. One, roast and probably have demons eating your flesh and whatnot forever. Or two, I'm not trying to flip you off, but maybe. You get to be with God in heaven forever. Those are your two options. Okay, this is a story that we've been told, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's still sort of ingrained in a lot of us because that's just like, yeah, you're born, life sucks, you die, and then you go to heaven or hell. Forever. Makes no sense. And nobody's clear on the rules on how to get to heaven or hell. So, that one, that story's a bit off, but everybody seems to be totally fine with it. Strangely enough. Now, the alternative, I shouldn't say alternative because there are multiple alternatives. But one alternative to that story is that instead of having a beginning and being born and then dying and then somehow continuing on either being burnt alive for all of eternity, or basically having an orgasm for all of eternity. I don't know how else we can conceptualize heaven. Instead of that, maybe perhaps that doesn't happen. There's your alternative. It doesn't happen. There's one alternative. And then perhaps another alternative is that whole story just has very little relevance to what actually goes on. That's a possibility. But as far as I can tell, and as far as I remember, most everybody agrees that we continue on in some form. Most everybody agrees that we continue on in some form. And then there's the whole consciousness gap theory. Well, it's my theory. I don't know if it's out there by anybody else, but according to me, if you've been living and then you have a spell for a billion years by somebody else's perspective where you were simply not aware at all and just nothing, no input, and then all of a sudden you popped in a billion years later, well, to you there is a continuity. And all that's happened is the world has changed to the tune of a billion years, or the universe, or wherever. So as far as I can tell, if you're meandering along being alive, and then all of a sudden you're not being aware anymore, if that's the end, and no more awareness ever comes around, well, you don't know. Okay, you're not there to know about it. And if that's not the case, if your awareness does come back eventually, then it's going to feel like you've been around forever. There won't be any gaps. So, based on that little theoretical thought experiment, as far as I can tell, once you become aware, you're aware forever. Otherwise, you don't know that you're there. So, there's that. But just consider the possibility that you don't have a beginning and that you don't have an end. Consider the possibility that you've always been around, always, and that you always will be around, always. And also consider the possibility that even if you wanted to stop existing, you couldn't do it. Consider that. How do you stop existing? How did you start existing? Maybe that's a better question. How did you start? And then maybe consider the possibility that being around forever and ever and having experienced lots of different things, you can't say experience everything, because in an infinite reality you can never experience everything, because there's always more. So consider that you've been around forever and that you've experienced oodles and oodles of things. And then you find that it's kind of cumbersome to carry around this memory of all these things, and it starts impinging on the now experience. Then you're like, we gotta store that memory somewhere else. We don't want it in the conscious aware body, because that's gonna fuck it up. So we're like, all right, let's store it somewhere else. Let's forget 99.9999% of everything that's happened. Okay, consider that, and then consider the possibility that someone else outside of this containment system that we voluntarily entered into, so as not to have to carry around the burden of knowing 1,000,000,001 things and remembering all that history. Suppose somebody outside is like, look at these guys, they limited themselves and now I'm gonna fuck with them. He's like, these gullible immortals thought they could limit themselves and not be fucked with. Well, they're wrong, and I'm gonna fuck with them. Consider that possibility. And then if you add to that little idea that every single being anywhere is directly contributing to the shared reality, directly, not via any conduits or third-party entities, no delegation. Every single conscious entity that is in the area, the arena, the world, the earth, wherever you are, I don't know where you are, maybe you're at the bottom of the ocean. Everyone that's there is directly contributing to what's happening in the now moment, always. And that it's constantly in flux and constantly evolving, and any sort of set outcomes are simply wrong, because for those to actually exist, every single conscious entity that's co-creating the reality would have to be in agreement, which would never ever happen, because nobody ever agrees with each other. Right? Does anybody agree with each other? Not too often. So if you consider some of those possibilities and then look at this world, then maybe perhaps you'll understand a bit more as to why it looks like it looks, and why it's hard to understand, and why it's also very simple at the same time. If you come at it from the perspective that life is eternal, it had no beginning, it has no end. Those are fantasies that arise within the mind of the infinite individual. Then once you realize that, you can't sit there and say, this is impossible, there's no way this is happening. Of course you can do that, because you can do anything, but it's not necessarily a wise thing to do if you want to understand what's going on. If you've been around forever, you're probably capable of getting bored, right? You've probably done lots of the same things and got really bored of them, if you've been around forever. So various versions of yourself or of other entities that you share the space with most likely would get together and figure out what's the ideal situation to carry on if we're going to be here forever. What's the ideal one that we could do? And then at the same time, you would realize that balance is an absolute necessity. Absolute necessity. And that at the same time, this balance couldn't be the responsibility of the conscious entities that have stepped down into limitation, because they can't see the whole picture enough to balance it. So that job has to be doled out to some other whoever, however, just not you. You're not doing it. Not consciously. You can't. But there's a need for it. For instance, if this little experiment here on the Earth ship were allowed to carry on with with no interference. This situation, which is, if you consider the concept of balance, this is nearly the complete direct opposite of that in all ways, then you would see that that's a situation that has to be remedied somehow. But the ones who are here in limited form don't know directly how to do that, but they know it must be done. Balance is a necessity. It's not even about achieving balance. It's not like you got to go and achieve balance. No, it has to be built in. You better hope it's built in. You better hope it's not something that you have to go and like provide a tool for achieving, because you're not going to be able to do it. I can't do it. I am only even able to talk about this concept because it's appropriate for this time. If it wasn't appropriate, the impetus would not even come up in me to talk about it. Or else I would decide not to. Or else the cell phone would blow up or something. I don't know. The fact that I'm doing it means that it's necessary to the realm. I don't even question it. I just know, alright, well, whatever. I don't care. Because you've been sold the eternity notion your whole lives. That's not new. It's just that you've been sold a version that says you started out when you were born, you lived 70 years, and then you were thrust into heaven or hell for all of eternity. That's a dumb story. Not that that story can't happen for some people, at least for some time. I would not say forever. But being that we create, well, if you believe something enough, then it's going to happen for you. So if you're a Christian and you believe you're going to hell, guess where you're going to go? If you're a Christian and you believe you're going to heaven, well, you know, if you believe it enough, then that's where you're going to go. And who knows how long you'll be there. I mean, it would be the funniest joke in the world if this actually was hell, and here in hell we go into churches that warn about how to stay away from hell. Wouldn't that be like the funniest joke ever? It would be pretty ironic and funny and mean at the same time. But there's not a limit to it. There's not a limit. There is not a limit. That's what infinity means. It means no limits, including the possibility of having limits. That it goes back to the whole, can God create a rock too heavy to lift? Nobody can ever answer that. Yes, he can. Well, then he's not omnipowerful, or whatever you consider God to be. What's the word? Omnipotent? Extra potent? Who created God? This and that. All these questions. Of course, they have no answers. But if the fact of the matter is that life is eternal, then there's no question of who created it. Nobody created it. Because creation involves a beginning. How can something eternal have a beginning? It's an irrelevant question. But the religions mix the idea of beginnings and ends along with the idea of eternity, and they make a big old paradoxical stew for your mind to think about and get scared about, and then you can't ponder any further than that because you're like, well, this is a big mind fuck, I'm not even going to think about it anymore. You know? I'm not going to think about it anymore. We'll back burner that one. Please comment. Please let me know what you think about eternity. Do you feel like you've been around forever and ever and ever and ever? And ever? And ever and ever and ever? And do you feel like you're gonna be around forever and ever 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 and ever? And if so, how does that make you feel? And if not, please give your explanation. I'm dying to hear it. Take care, be well. Let me know what you think.